All right, we are going to jump right into our next partner presentation. Totally understand if you guys need to hop up out of your seat at any point for a quick bio break. The restrooms are just right back there. But we will go ahead and get started. This is Andrew with Join.
Thank you, Summer. Hello. Yeah, that's us. All right, so I'm here to talk about target value design in 25 minutes, and no one will leave here knowing how to do target value design if you don't already. LCI, the Lean Construction Institute, is running a week-long conference in New Orleans next week. They got a full day to teach you how to do target value design if you want to learn the insides and outs of it. I'm here just to talk about it because it's a trend we're seeing with our customer base. I'm with a software vendor called Join. And I'm hoping that everyone will leave here feeling a lot more confident about TVD and much more ready to embrace it, if they see it out there in the world. First, a little bit about us, a little bit about me. So I'm one of the co-founders at Join. We're a software technology startup based in the Bay Area. Johnny earlier was talking about all the venture capitalists who are pushing money into companies in the space, and that's us. Not only us, but we've been fortunate to partner with some good investors over the years. My background personally is in software engineering. I grew up in the logic synthesis world, which is part of like microchip design, and then I spent time in 3D printed medical device design of all things, customized scoliosis braces and hand and wrist braces. And I share all of that simply because I encountered construction maybe 8 years ago and totally fell in love with it. I think it's way more interesting than all of these other fields. Microchips are pretty complicated, medical devices are pretty complicated, buildings are even more complicated. We were touring a new cross-laminated timber project in the Bay Area that had deployed our software during pre-construction a few years back, and now it's like well into operations and getting close to handover, and we toured it, and the project manager was like, there are 340,000 screws in this building holding this thing together. It's like, oh, that's a pretty big number. Where have I heard that number before? And I was thinking about it, and where I had heard something like that before was in all the statistics about airplane design. I don't know if anybody's heard this. Like a Boeing 737 has something like 500,000 rivets in it, right? It's like, that's everything that has to go together to put something together that's gonna fly through the sky. And turns out, new construction, good sized building at least, but to a first approximation, buildings are just as complicated as airplanes. But airplanes roll off an assembly line. It's a great assembly line. If anyone's ever in Everett, Washington, up until COVID at least, you could go tour the Boeing factory. I made my bachelor party go do that, and it's like this it was really disappointing. That's not where they thought we were going when we got in the car. We spent it was awesome. I mean, you spend like half a day there, and they got the 747s that they're building, and the 737s, and it's like new manufacturing technology, It's super cool. Read the room. So airplanes are complicated. Buildings are just as complicated. Those airplanes roll off in an assembly line. For like the 747s, it's the same assembly line that they put in place in like the 60s. Like it's like wooden frames that hold things together while they come in and rivet pieces of metal together. Okay. Every building is built unique. Every building is basically a prototype. And the combination of that complexity, the fact that teams of specialist stakeholders are going to come together to solve problems that were unique to every building, that combined with the impact that construction has on every community, on our environment, on our planet, on our country, brought our team to this. So that's why we've fallen in love with it. It's just the potential for impact. I mean, construction's like 10% of GDP. It's like this crazy engine of the middle class in this country. It's like awesome what we build. Anyway, Join's a team of technologists. About half the people at the company have come from industry. Some have passed through various customers who have representatives here in the audience. And we've come together because we believe that the problems that are happening in pre-construction are sort of uniquely impactful in the industry, and that stakeholders and teams such as yours deserve better technology in pre-construction. Okay, and I'm here to talk about TVD. Who does TVD? Okay, 1, 2, yep, great, cool. That sounds about right. Now, who does value engineering? Okay, everyone whose hand is down is hopefully lying, right? Like, everybody does value engineering, okay. And so TVD is like value engineering sped up and done over and over. Doesn't need to be intimidating, but it can be exciting, okay? TVD came out of the lean world, it came out of the integrated project delivery world. Who does integrated project delivery projects? Oh wow, that's like way more than I would have thought. It's a pretty, sometimes thought of as sort of a niche, niche delivery method in the industry. It requires a lot of owner commitment up front. And we've always been a little bit intimidated by it. We got a little bit of concern that if we wander into the world of IPD, we'll like be buried in a mountain of A3s and lean process after lean process until we fall over. But we're here to talk about TVD because we're seeing TVD adopted by negotiated work and design build teams who would never touch IPD. It's a technique that's being taken from the IPD world and applied much, much, much more broadly and to great effect. So target value design or target value delivery is a collaborative approach to aligning cost and schedule in the design throughout design and pre-construction and planning. Okay? The key thing there is that teams that have stakeholders that represent not just design, but people who understand cost and who understand schedule are working together, meeting regularly, talking regularly, sharing data regularly throughout the design and planning process so you don't end up where the target's over there and the design's over there. This is a result of ongoing changes in delivery method, right? I mean, I'm sure everyone here is seeing this. I missed the poll earlier, but I'm imagining that the audience is pretty heavy on negotiated work, although it's probably still doing a fair amount of hard bid. And the stats back this up. The world is moving towards negotiated, and it's moving towards design build work. And this is putting new pressures on at least the customers that we've been fortunate enough to partner with. And we're seeing it happen on a surprisingly quick timescale. Maybe two stories here. Just one we were sitting with the president, the founder of a highly respected regional contractor here in Texas, who was talking about how over 30 years they had built the firm. He and his family, and I think it was his brother-in-law or someone, had built this firm together, and they'd done it by being really good at executing hard bid work. And they built this whole company, and it employs all these people, and it built all these structures that were key to the communities like around this firm. And what they had found was they'd woken up and realized that over half of their work was now negotiated. And that doing negotiated work very well, you still have to execute the work. It's still like hard bid. You still need to know how to build buildings. But there's a new emphasis on communication throughout the project lifecycle, and that's something that they're getting better at. Even though their work is substantially negotiated, they've recognized they haven't necessarily gotten as good at communication as they would need to be to really maximize the impact of all that negotiated work, which is to say sometimes they're losing jobs. The other, and this was happening even faster, this wasn't like a 30-year change. Talking to another customer who does a fair amount of work in the Midwest. They got part of their business does a bunch of institutional work, higher ed, healthcare, that sort of thing, and then another part does a bunch of industrial in the Midwest. And we talked to them, and things are going great for us with their institutional side. And we went and we talked to the industrial side, and we said, okay, this is what we do, and we focus on this and this and this. And they said, yeah, we know that negotiated is the future, but we're just not seeing it. Like, we're still doing 90% hard bid. And we said, okay, probably not a great fit for us, but we'll call you back in like 3, 4, 5 years, something like that, when the worm will have turned in a way. And we were surprised to get called back 1 year later. And it was because they said, hey, you may have noticed we're building a lot of battery plants in the Midwest. These battery plants are all being delivered through highly collaborative, delivery methods. And so they said, hey, in 1 year, we've gone from 20% sort of negotiated collaborative modes to 80%. Just like completely overnight, transformed how they have to work with their design partners, with their owners, with important trades. And so this is pushing teams to execute in new ways. The old way of working is dominated by a one-way flow of information. And this really emphasizes the cost. So someone goes off, like architect sits over here, designs something, works the spec book, works with an owner, tells them they can have everything in the whole world. And they come over and hand it out to a few contractors and say, like, hey, what's it going to cost? How are we going to build this? Like, give me some bids. What's this going to cost? And then they get numbers back, and their head explodes, their eyes fly out, like a cartoon or something, and say, like, well, that just doesn't work, right? And that leads to this value engineering process, right? which is really one way. A design comes in, and value engineering has to come out. And maybe there are opportunities to work with design teams and work with the owner to guide that value engineering, but it has to happen really quickly, and there's not a lot of opportunity to work together on it. And so it means often as not, the architect's sitting over here saying like, you know, we want this to be a good building, and like something comes in saying like, hey, you gotta cut X, you gotta cut Y, and like A, B, and C are on the chopping block as well. And they don't understand why, they don't see why. Some of those things might have been really important to the owner's goals in the project, but they're out of the project, right? The project gets built, it gets built for the right number. But two things happen. Like one, a lot can get lost along the way in terms of owner priorities. The owner isn't gonna be as happy with the result, it's not gonna meet their business needs as well. You know, the design team's gonna be unhappy along the way. Maybe that's not, you know, it's important, but not quite as important. And then second, like that painful process of value engineering stretches out, pushes back different execution activities. You know, it means you have to compress the execution schedule, and that's not good. Okay, and so this results in, you know, buildings that don't live up to their potential, construction projects that don't meet owner requirements as well as they can. And this always gives me a chuckle, but the new way of doing things, this target value design, which is agile, which is iterative, emphasizes owner outcomes. And so from the beginning, people understand cost. People in this room understand cost and schedule, are sitting and working with design teams to, decision by decision, guide the project towards the right balance of owner goals, you know, and cost. This means you're making earlier decisions. It means that you're, you know, making subtle adjustments to where the ship is going, as opposed to, you know, swinging the steering wheel 180 degrees because, you know, you got people mobilizing to the site and you need to pick where you're going. And you're under a lot of budget pressure all at once, all at the end. You know, we hear great things about it. Here, let's talk about what it looks like when you succeed. Like, it lets you navigate all sorts of challenges. I'm sure everybody's seeing material escalation problems, especially in the last 2 years. Like, how do you react to that? How can you react quickly to that? How you can provide that to the design teams that use the right material system where they can approve the substitution early so that people can move as quickly as possible into the field and get the right building for the owner built as quickly as possible. Engaging early, engaging often lets this happen. So how do teams do this? What's necessary for success? The first thing, probably the most important thing that we hear from people is establishing trust up front, okay? Like, you gotta have mutual trust between the owner, the design team, and the contractor. Everybody's gotta trust that everybody else is being straightforward and working towards, you know, a shared goal. It's not always easy. Like, you know, one of my favorite stories about a loss of trust came from a contractor in Central California who was on a $100 million medical office job, and they were pretty late in the process, and they were sitting in an OIC meeting and, you know, looking at plans, and someone pointed to a wall and said, hey, we're gonna need an outlet here. And the owner looked to the contractor and says, like, okay, we gotta add an outlet here. What's that gonna cost? What's it gonna cost? And the contractor says, $1,000, right? Let's move on. We've got more important things to discuss than a single outlet in this $100 million job, right? And they do move on then. And 2 weeks later, they come back for the next meeting, and everybody gets there early, and they're all sitting down, you know, sitting like this. And the owner walks in, and he's carrying a bag. And he looks at them, and he says, how can you tell me an outlet's gonna cost $1,000? How are you telling me it's gonna cost $1,000 to have an outlet? And he pours the contents of the bag on the table. And he holds up a receipt because he had gone to Home Depot and he had bought a faceplate and an outlet and a little bit of conduit and some wire. And he's like, this costs $69. How can you tell me it's gonna cost $1,000? I bought everything you're gonna need for $69. And right, not a lot of trust that led into that. If they're trying to track down like $1,000 decision on this $100 million job, if they're trying to understand that, if they don't trust the contractor, like, imagine the level of detail they're gonna bring to like the $1 million decisions, the $10 million decisions that they're gonna have to make in order to get this project to move forward, right? And the truth is, like, yeah, it probably costs $1,000. Like, look, it's a medical office. Like, the discount bin from Home Depot, like, isn't gonna meet the spec that you're putting together. Like, and these are parts sitting on a table. You may notice that we require like highly trained labor to install it, and then it has to be inspected, and you didn't get enough conduit because it's a really long run out to the rest of the electrical system, and so on and so on and so on. There's all this information, this context, that if it had been provided to the owner early, and if it was an environment that had trust, maybe the owner wouldn't have asked for it in the first place, that was missing. And so the owner was just, you know, furious about this. And if they're bringing that level of disruption to $1,000, it's like a rounding error. Like when you're describing this job, like if you're describing like what it's going to be built for, you're not going to mention that $1,000. It just gets lost in noise. But if they're caring about every $1,000 that way, how the heck are you going to get all the way through Precon? Like you might have hundreds, thousands of decisions like that to make. Like you have to make them in order to enable people to mobilize, and execute on site. And so, yeah, that's a low trust environment. That's what you want to avoid. Key to that is establishing trust up front, being straightforward with your partners, being transparent, owning your mistakes as they happen, being able to call out other people's mistakes when they happen. When the architect got the okay to change something about a bathroom, but decided to change all the circulation spaces as well and introduce some nice, decorative hung ceilings and some expensive terrazzo tiling on the floor at the same time, to be able to call and say, like, no, that's not what we talked about. Like, this is the only change that we talked about. This is why cost is trending the wrong way. Second is around communication. It's around communicating data, communicating as much data as can be understood, okay? Teams here are used to building up incredibly detailed estimates for buildings. There's just so much detail in there. It might be 10,000 lines, like in a estimate that's driven from like a robust takeoff of a full set of plans, right? What the heck is like a design team or an owner going to do with 10,000 lines of estimate? Like how are they supposed to work with this? Like that's not how they think. It's not their world. Like, they're hiring to some extent the construction team, and they're working with the construction team because they understand that. They understand all the parts and pieces, how you actually deliver a building. Like, what are they supposed to do with this 10,000 line estimate? How are they supposed to understand what they need to do, what's required of them? And they can, right? Like, construction teams can work with that. Design teams think more programmatically, telling them that, like, hey, you're way over in electrical conduit. Like there's just like way too many electrical runs in this project. Like you gotta figure out how to get that down. That's like way higher than what we're seeing in other projects. Like, what are they supposed to do with that? It's gonna be really hard to work with it. But if you go in and say, hey, your circulation spaces have crazy lighting schemes, like is this really necessary? Like you're way over versus like what we budgeted for the circulation spaces. Like being able to explain it to them in a language that they can understand, they can wrap their arms around, is important. It empowers them. It gives them trust that you're working towards the owner's goal. You're working towards a shared goal together. And it lets them respond to it and say, like, okay, yeah, I understand. I can work with that. Or like, no, actually, for this reason, this is going to be a big spend. Like, this is something that the owners really emphasize. It's something that's really important to them. Let's look for savings somewhere else. Lastly, just being able to track these decisions. If the design happens without cost, like in some ways the design is much simpler. Like you don't have to track costs. You don't have to understand it. If it's just the owner and the architect who are sitting there deciding what they want in sort of this dream building that will probably not actually get built, it's much simpler. When a wider team's involved, when a wider set of stakeholders is collaborating around this, there's a lot more going on for every one of these decisions. There's a lot more people that might need to be informed. There's a lot more people who might need to contribute a few pieces of the puzzle or understand the landscape as it's evolving. And so making sure you have good systems in place to track those decisions and their impacts is something that we hear emphasized over and over. We're a software vendor. That's the piece we can help with. If you're interested in learning more, I'm happy to share more later. And this leads to cool things. So this is a quote. This is a quote from a designer or project manager at HRK, prominent national design firm. And the project they were on, they deployed a system that allowed them to much more easily share at a high level cost information with the design team. What it meant was they were partway through the project, and like they started tracking, like, hey, we're over budget, we got to make changes, and people were proposing ideas, changes to the facade, cost-saving measures to the facade. The designer looked at this and said, like, no, I don't think this is right. Like, I don't think this is where we should try to save money. Like, this is really important to the owner. It can be this like iconic thing on their campus. Like, this is something that's important. This isn't where we should try to save money. Because there was enough transparency into where costs were coming from, and it was intelligible to them, and they were able to see sort of where the team was thinking they were going to need to save money before it came over the wall as like, pull out all the glass. They were able to say like, oh, okay, I see what we need to do. Actually, these stairways, we don't need them. We just thought they look cool. Like, we don't need them for code. We don't need them for circulation. The building works without these stairs. Like, let's cut these. They were able to go and find alternative ways to save. They're going to not only like get the project to where it needed to be, and keep the design team happy, this team that like values and cherishes the occupant experience. The owner was probably going to be happier as a result. The owner was going to get something that actually matched like the renderings that they had been sold at the beginning, and something that actually worked for them operationally. So everybody wins here. Nobody's losing here. And it's kind of cool to see designers and construction teams who aren't like at each other's throats at the end of pre-construction. Okay, so the last piece of this is making sure that these decisions stick. We've got a software platform that's used to manage these decisions, it's used to communicate this information, it's used to coordinate all the impacts. It's, you know, we've been on the market probably 5 years now and been working with some folks in the audience for good portions of that. And the result is we have a bunch of data on like what's typical, right? We're just able to look at this and say like, hey, what happens? And one thing we're able to find is that on a typical project, sort of actually regardless of size, which surprised us, you make 1,000 to 2,000 decisions. Like the owner's gonna have to make 1,000 to 2,000 decisions that impact either their budget or their business case. Obviously there's a bunch of execution decisions, like, like where are we gonna stage this on site? Like who are we gonna pick to execute this scope of work? But like owners gotta make 1,000 to 2,000 decisions that dictate like what the project is gonna be, okay? And that's a lot of what design and pre-construction is just making those decisions. The other thing we found is that decision life cycle is about a month. Some are a lot faster. Some can be made immediately on the spot. Some are complicated and just like carry on for a really long time. But like a typical decision is about a month. Various stakeholders involved and you're tracking the whole thing. And you know, what's interesting about this is it just points to like the complexity of this problem. Let's say pre-construction is gonna be a year, rough numbers, maybe it's 18 months. That means you need to make about 100 decisions a month, like to go from start to finish. Okay? And if each decision takes about a month to make, it means at any one time, you got like 100 things that are changing or in flight or are possible at any one time. A lot of these decisions are simple. It's like, we're changing carpet tile. Like, we're gonna switch manufacturers. Not that many people need to be informed. Other of them are gonna be a lot more complicated. Like, oh, hey, we're changing the anchoring system for all the balconies. Like, actually, we gotta inform, like, you know, concrete and the facade and, like, make sure the electrical runs that go through all still work and so forth. Like, there's a lot more fan out for that one. A lot of these are complicated. So you got 100 decisions going on at any one time. Each of them might impact multiple scopes, multiple trades. Like each of them needs to make sure that they've been incorporated into the drawings once the decision has been made. It's really the end of, I mean, it's not the end of the world. People get through this, people get amazing buildings built, but it's a lot simpler if when you make the decision, everybody has the confidence going into it to not need to revisit it later. This isn't dragging on, you're not like going backwards in time and revisiting decisions that were made earlier in the project. You're able to move forward, you're able to put the decisions to rest, you're able to move on. That's important because once you make all these decisions, you get to GMP. Teams may be able to move forward confidently into construction, deliver a building, you know, the owners love, leads to repeat business, leads to happier design partners, leads to pre-construction teams who get to go home earlier, spend more time with their family. Yeah, that's TVD and why you should care about it. I'm Andrew. Thanks so much for the time. I don't know if there are questions or anything, but happy to take them. I'll be around for the tech showcase thing if anybody would like to learn more about what we do. Thank you so much.